So when we talk about morality, we think about something that is good ethically. So it's doing the right thing, causing the least amount of harm while at the same time doing something that is overall good, right? So if you're a moral person, you think about the suffering of others and you live your life according to that. So when this comes to our diet, some of the most morally obvious things that are not going to be quote unquote moral, one of them would be the carnivore diet. Because most of today, the way that we eat or the type of meat that a lot of us eat has been raised on a factory farm. So the cattle was raised on a farm. It went through a lot of things that probably weren't good for it, and a lot of suffering, a lot of separation from their family. So eating meat is an obvious one because the state of the way that factory farms are today, to say that your diet is moral, it should have zero to minimal suffering. So when we compare this diet to something like a vegetarian diet, an animal is not being harmed during the vegetarian diet, but you are harming a plant a lot of the times. So, for instance, if you were to eat a carrot, that carrot was a root at one point and it was alive. And if you think about it, a plant cell is just as alive as a human cell or an animal cell. Now the question is, do plants feel emotions and pain or distress the same way that humans do? It's going to be a lot different. I've heard that when you cut the grass, there's that smell in the air. And that smell is related to a hormone that's released from when the grass got cut. So it's like a stress hormone. Plants are going through these stress signals. So they are going through a distress in a way. And there are hormones that are going through the plant. Now, for us to look at this, we can say, yes, plants are going through stress when we rip them out of the ground from their environment. And plants are going through things that are not pleasant. So how moral is the vegetarian diet really? Is it because plants don't have eyes or fur or ears? Is it easier to eat plants for those reasons? What makes a plant more alive than a human? They're both the same amount of aliveness. Now, their value is going to be different depending on what they're used for. So when I think about eating meat, eating plants, when you're eating those things, you're eating something that has already been alive before. It's the nature of survival. But upon doing research on this topic, I came across something called the fruitarian diet. Now, the fruitarian diet only involves eating fruits that have fell naturally from the tree. So you're not necessarily killing the plant. You're just taking the parts of the plant that it would have already given up already. For instance, like fruit. To me, in my mind, this would be considered the most moral diet. A diet where it causes the least harm on the life form. And for me, I think that that would be the most moral diet. I'd love to hear what your opinion is. And if you leave it in the comments, that'd be great. But this brings us to a question. What makes one life more valuable than another life? Whether it be plants, whether it be humans, whether it be bacteria. These are all forms of life. But how do we assign it value? To be valuable is to serve a purpose. Provide something that gives you something, if that makes sense. So if you think about the purpose of a plant, it can add value, right? Nutritional value. Plants can add medicinal value. So we can value plants in that way. And then we think about people. So what do people do? People provide value to us emotionally. People provide value to us intellectually. People can educate us. There's many ways that people can provide value to another person. And there's many ways that plants can. So both offer their values in different ways. But if there's a plant dying and there's a human dying, which one are you going to save? Likely it's going to be the human because we're humans and we have biases to save other humans. Maybe if I was a plant, I would save the plant's life. That's if I could move. But how about if you were a tiger? Would you save another human's life or would you save another tiger's life? We all have our biases for what we value. And a lot of people would say that humans are more valuable than plants or other animals because we can do things like go into space. We can do things like create calculus. We have technology. We have things that are in your face, iPhone, growth, innovation. So that makes us great. That sets us apart from other animals. But what if all these things that we're doing, what if they're not as important as we think they are? What if this great technological advance to go into space is just the beginning? And the reality is that it's really not that great at all. We haven't even made it to our next planet yet. So what if there's a form of alien life or just more evolved people that are looking at us and thinking that that's nice, they're coming along? Just thinking about if we place our value in the fact that we have good technology, put that into perspective, it might not be as good as we think it is. Now, we say that because we can do things like go into space, that we're smarter, that we're better. But what if those things aren't important to other animals? What if those things that we think that are so important are biased because we're human? We think that these amazing things that we can do set us apart, which they do set us apart. I'm not denying that. But how important is that in general, in the big picture? How important is it to be going into space? Just the fact that we have these technological advances, do we automatically think we're better? I think most people do. But the reality is that we are just as alive as a plant or another animal. So to be a vegetarian for moral reasons could specifically have to do with knowing that animals have pain. Now, if plants do actually have pain, then what are you going to eat? And that's where the fruitarian diet comes in. Overall, with these thoughts, we're just encompassing life, humanity, value, and diet. What does diet mean to you? What does diet mean to your morality? Just because you eat a plant, does that make it more moral than eating a cow? Just because you eat a cow, does that make it more moral than eating a rat? We have to think about that it comes down to our cultural biases too. If you grew up eating a rat every single day or once a week ever since you were a kid, it's going to be no big deal. It's going to be like eating a chicken. But how about if you're not going through that? Then when you look at those things, you're going to be grossed out or you're going to be turned away from it and maybe think it's barbaric. Which, if you grew up not eating that rat, it could be considered that way. There's certain cultures that eat things like dogs, cats. We look at those things. We think about morality. But what makes eating a cat or a dog morally different than eating a cow? Or eating a chicken? Or eating a carrot? They're all alive in their own different ways. Morality comes from being aware of yourself and your pain that you're inflicting on other life forms. If you don't know the pain that you're inflicting on other life forms, then you don't know if you're being moral. Those are just some questions or just some thoughts on morality and diet. If you enjoyed some of these discussions, feel free to leave any comments. Feel free to say your thoughts on the issue. Do you think that there is a more moral diet than the fruitarian diet? Because we gotta eat. We need calories. So where are you getting them from? That's it for today. My name is Manolo G, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.